here.
Let's talk a little bit more about Super Tuesday. Falls on March 5th, as we pointed out. March 4th, which is also a key date for obvious reasons, that is when the trial date is tentatively set for Donald Trump in that federal case where he's charged with trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. This is a dark cloud, David, that's hanging over this race. Also a bit of a wild card in the presidential race because we just don't know what's going to happen. We have no idea.
Sure.
The fight to get his name on the ballot in Colorado was still a problem for Donald Trump, so there are sort of these lingering factors as well. How does all this play into a bigger picture presidential race in your view?
Well, first off, I was going to say this is the part that perplexes everybody, including political scientists, because we have sort of ways that we can kind of make some guesses about what's going to happen. These are two variables, both whether he can appear on the ballot, not just in Colorado or Maine, but maybe the rest of the country, and two, his legal problems we've never faced before in American history. And I think these have a bigger impact in terms of the general election than they do the primary season. For the primary season, it does not look like his supporters have at all been fazed by anything that's happened. In fact, he's been so successful in using his legal troubles, his court appearances, is almost like campaign rallies. He's been able to raise money from it. So that, I don't think that poses a problem for him. The bigger problem is how does these legal problems affect a few swing voters in those 5 or so swing states that are going to determine the general election. At the end of the day, I'm going to argue that there's probably less than 200,000 voters in 5 states that are going to really determine the election. And that's where I think the biggest impact is. The other issue, I'm going to throw out just an argument here, and I can't, and people can agree or disagree. I think the October surprise that we always talk about in presidential elections, the October surprise will be something about his legal problems at that point. And what I mean by that, the biggest October surprise, of course, could be if he gets, remember, he's presumption of innocence until proven guilty, but let's say he's found guilty in a trial that the results come in October. That's where I think we're going to see the biggest impact in terms of what does that mean. The other possible place where it has an impact is, let's say there is again, possibly a guilty verdict after he's gotten the nomination. Do the Republicans have any cold feet, and do they want to do anything? But if you look at the Republican national rules, they can't basically say, you've been convicted, you're off. They can replace somebody who's incapacitated, death, serious illness, et cetera, but they just can't sort of say, we don't want you as the nomination anymore. So I think we have a couple of points here. One is what it means in terms of the general election and what it might mean, let's say, post-convention in terms of what happens. Yeah,
your hands are kind of tied by October on a lot of issues. It becomes really insurmountable.
Well, it becomes a big issue, of course, nationwide, is the fact that with early voting, we actually have early voting starting 45 days before the election. So approximately, I haven't calculated out here, but somewhere, let's say approximately September, let's say 20th, 25th or something like that, right around that point is when early voting is going to start in Minnesota and across the country. And if you had to replace somebody, you now have got all the problems of ballot access, and people might remember we faced problems like this in Minnesota before many, many years ago. You know, it was when Paul Wellstone's plane crashed 11 days before the election, and you had to figure out how to replace him. So that's where I think it becomes really authority problem at this point, is that if something does happen, a conviction, perhaps, once we get into late September when the ballots are already being sent out. In fact, I'll even go a little bit earlier. Those ballots have to be printed probably early September.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if a lot of states have a system in place to handle the unexpected. Like, can you go get your vote back and recast a vote if you voted early 3 weeks before the election? So anything like that will really test the system again.